The UN-backed tribunal has convicted a member of Hezbollah over the assassination of the former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. The killing in 2005 set the stage for years of confrontation between rival political forces. Judges in The Hague have found Salim Jamil Ayash guilty of committing terrorist acts and of homicide. They say Ayash bought the explosives and coordinated surveillance on Hariri beforehand. The three other members of Hezbollah were acquitted because of a lack of evidence. None were in court today. Hezbollah denies involvement and has refused to hand the men over. The judges say that while Hezbollah's leaders and the Syrian government might have had motives to kill Hariri, there's no direct evidence they did. But, they say, the nature of the killing was clear.
The attack was an act of terrorism that was designed to spread fear among the Lebanese population. It was committed for political and not personal reasons. The trial chamber is of the view that Syria and Hezbollah may have had motives to eliminate Mr. Hariri and some of his political allies. However, there was no evidence that the Hezbollah leadership had any involvement in Mr. Hariri's murder, and there is no direct evidence of Syrian involvement in it.
Well, Rafik Hariri's son, the former Prime Minister Saad Hariri, says his family does accept the ruling but wants to see a punishment being served.
We had, like many presidents and many former prime ministers, were killed either in office or outside office, and we never had any truth of what happened. I think today's, everybody's expectation was much higher than what came out, but I believe that the tribunal came out with a result that is satisfying. We accept it.
A lawyer representing one of the three men acquitted says the trial was ill-conceived.
These accusations against Hussein Hassan Onesi should have never been made. They should have never been approved, and this process should have never taken place. Today we are obviously very happy for Mr. Onesi, but at the same time I am particularly very saddened that millions of dollars were spent on a file so empty and a verdict that was from the beginning said to be so mediocre.
OK, let's go live now to Beirut and our correspondent there, Zaina Hodder. Zaina, do we think this will do anything to mend the divisions that are so obvious across Lebanon now?
Well, Hariri's killing and the subsequent creation of the International Tribunal divided this country. The nation is polarized ever since that day. It depends who you talk to. Supporters of Hezbollah will call this court a political tool that is being used by the United States to diminish the group's influence. But the families of the victims, as well as other Lebanese, will say that justice has been served. 5 men were initially indicted. One of them has since died in mysterious circumstances in Syria, Mustafa Badreddin, a very well-known Hezbollah commander. And the court finding 1 man guilty, acquitting the 3 others. Now, the International Tribunal, its mandate, it has to find and ensure the guilty verdict beyond reasonable doubt. And that is why it wasn't able, it acquitted the 3 others. But at the end of the day, it linked or affiliated Salim Ayash, the man they found guilty, with Hezbollah. And it's not just that, they affiliated him with Mustafa Badreddin. And Hezbollah does not deny its links with these men. In fact, the Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah calls them our brothers. So, at the end of the day, this tribunal does not have the mandate. I think this is very important. It doesn't have the mandate to try countries or states or governments or organizations. This was the agreement when it was set up in the United Nations. But now there is a guilty verdict. Will it heal divisions? It's unlikely. Today we are joined by a victim's wife. He was the head of security, your husband, Talal Ahsan. What do you feel today? And Ahsan is going to speak to us in Arabic, and I'm going to do my best to translate what you're telling us.
هلا أول شيء نحن صرنا 15 سنة ناطرين هيدا النهار ونحن خلال 15 سنة كنا ناطرين الحقيقة والعدالة منا ناطرين لحتى نحاكم حدا ولا لحتى إنه انه تكون المحكمه بس عم بتحط اسماء لتحط اسماء يعني. نحن كنا منتظرين من المحكمه انه يكون قرارها حسب المعطيات اللي عندها.
What she's saying is that they waited for 15 years and they wanted justice. And right now, what the tribunal has done is just name a few people. What was it that you were expecting more?
هلا نحن مثل ما كل الناس تابعت المحكمه وشافت انه كان في عده اسامي كانت عم بتدور حواليهم التهمه. اكيد مش يعني هدول الاسامي نحن كنا ناطرين يعني بيضلوا المتهم بريء لتثبت ادانته، بما انه في 3 منهم انه ما عليهم التهمه. في شخص واحد اتهم بفعل او بالاشتراك بفعل الجريمه، في شخص ثاني قالوا انه مات بال 2016 وهو له علاقه، والاثنين لهم علاقه بحزب. يعني هيدا أكثر شيء ببين لهم إنه المحكمة منا مسيسة ومنا جاي تحط أسامي بس لحتى تجمع ناس من هيدا الطرف وتقول لهم أنتم متهمين بمقتل الرئيس الشهيد رفيق الحريري.
What Ahsan is saying is basically that this, so there has been a lot of criticism directed at this court saying it is politicized. What she's saying, what you saw today, that it is not politicized because they acquitted three people because they didn't have enough evidence against them. But what is your reaction to Saad Hariri's statements that he made following the verdict?
هلا نحن طبعا نحن والشيخ سعد كنا ناطرين كعائلة حريري كمان، وخاصة الشيخ سعد لأنه هو اللي بيكون موجود أكثر بلاهاي وهو اللي بيصرح إجمالا. نحن إنه كنا منتظرين قرار المحكمة، ونحن من الأول قلنا إنه نحن ملتزمين بقرار المحكمة. هلا اللي صار إنه يعني أنا من بعد تصريحه إنه خلص يعني ما بقى في الشخص المدان يقول أنا ما دخلني بهدول الأشخاص، لأنه في شخص ثبت عليه إدانته وثبت عليه لمين منتمي.
So basically what Ahsan is saying is that you wanted them to spell it out, not an indirect accusation that the group was behind the killing of Rafik Hariri, correct? يعني انت قصدك يعني انت كان بدك حزب كمنظمه يقولوا مين مسؤول، يعني مين قال؟
لا هلا انا يعني اذا حدا انه اللي تابعوا اليوم المحكمه بيشوفوا كثير منيح انه القاضي عاد كذا مره انه هيدا الشخص لمين منتمي وهيدا الشخص لمين منتمي. اوكي ونحن بنعرف بالقانون المحكمه هي لا تدين حزب، يعني بس هي فسرت بطريقه انه هيدا الشخص له علاقه بهيدي المجموعه.
Yes, so basically, this is what a lot of people have told us, that indirectly Hezbollah has been blamed for the assassination, that the court affiliated these men with the group one way or the other. What people like Ahsan wanted to hear was a clearer statement on who was responsible for the killing. So some are disappointed, they wanted much more, but right now we have to wait to see the political fallout of this verdict.
Zaina, thank you very much. You'll keep us across all the developments, I'm sure. In the meantime, we'll talk to you later. Joining us now is Kevin John Heller, International Law Professor at the University of Copenhagen. He joins us on Skype from Melbourne in Australia. Kevin Heller, welcome to the NewsHour. How can this be enforced?
Well, it can't really be enforced. Obviously, there was only one conviction out of the original 5 defendants. And if in the unlikely event that the tribunal or the authorities were to ever get their hands on Mr. Ayash, the convicted defendant, he would be entitled to a full retrial. So basically, they would have to start over and prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt all over again. So there's a long way to go between this verdict and ever seeing Mr. Ayash pay for his sins.
Really, why would he be entitled to a full retrial given the events today in The Hague?
It's actually a provision in the statute of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon that when you try a defendant in absentia, that if in fact they are later apprehended, they are entitled to a full retrial. And that's also consistent with international human rights law. So that's not really an unclear legal question at this point.
The Court of Public Opinion in Lebanon clearly has its reaction set in stone to the events of today and indeed the events of 15 years ago. Is there a chance, despite the chaos for slightly different reasons given the explosion 2 weeks ago now, is there a chance that we see some sort of legal process taking place inside the country, or is that just completely a non-starter, if only because of the political traction that Hezbollah has, the way it's managed to weave itself into the political machinery in the country?
Well, I think you definitely have to separate the legal and the political there. Legally, there's certainly no reason why, if in fact Mr. Ayash was ever apprehended, that he couldn't be prosecuted in Lebanon. But as you say, politically, it's probably a non-starter. I mean, there's a reason why, to some extent, Lebanon was in favor of an international process to begin with, precisely because of the difficult political situation when you have crimes that are at least allegedly tied to Hezbollah and to Syria.
So whether we're talking about the domestic legal framework or the international legal framework and the application of the law, because that's what we've seen at The Hague today, you seem to be saying this isn't an end to the process. This is just the end of a chapter in a potential process which could, in theory, unfold in multiple different scenarios.
I think that's a very good way to characterize it, yes.
What might happen next?
Well, there will certainly be an appeal. This doesn't even end this chapter of the process. Obviously, the convicted defendant is entitled to appeal. The prosecution has a right to appeal. There's going to be a whole nother chapter that is written. We don't even really know how long that will take. The first stage of this process took a very, very long time. So the first thing that has to happen is the appeal will run its course, and then they'll have to decide, based on who's convicted, who's acquitted, what the next step is in enforcement. And it's very unclear how you would even begin to try to apprehend Mr. Ayash or any of the other defendants who perhaps, would be convicted on appeal. There's really no clear path to accountability in this case. And I think that's been one of the major criticisms of the tribunal trying the defendants in absentia really from the beginning.
OK, we must leave it there. Kevin Heller, many thanks. Let's bring in now Nadim Houri, the Executive Director of the Arab Reform Initiative. He joins us here on the NewsHour from Paris. Nadim Houri, what does this do to Lebanese politics?
It depends who you ask. In many ways, the judgment, each side of the divide in Lebanon will find some solace in it. Some will say, look, one of the main suspects was convicted, and that shows that Hezbollah is guilty. Those defending Hezbollah will say, well, the other three were found not guilty of the other four, and there was no responsibility. In a way, Lebanon had already absorbed the shock of these findings many years ago. There is nothing new, factually speaking, in the judgment today. And I have to say that with pain, because the process has taken so long, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon is a bit of a relic of the past. It epitomized the divisions between the March 8 and March 14, these divisions that really dominated the mid-2000s in Lebanon's life and even early 2010s. But today, the real division in Lebanese society is between those who really want to change the entire system and the existing oligarchs in power. And it's very interesting that actually Hezbollah and Hariri have been together in government now many, many times over. And last October, when Lebanese protesters were demanding that Hariri resign, one of the biggest defenders of Hariri were Hassan Nasrallah. So politically, in a way, the STL's relevance to daily political life in Lebanon has been reduced over the years.
How does it play into the scenes of anger that we're seeing now day after day on the streets of Lebanon, off the back of the Beirut port explosion, blended together with the political situation as of today, which in of itself is chaos anyway?
It's a very important question, and there's a very interesting development. I mean, the creation of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon back in 2005, 2006 was in a way the Lebanese political class saying, we don't want to handle this issue. We don't know how to hold anyone accountable, so please come and handle this for us. Today, the mood in Lebanon is very different. For the first time in Lebanon's recent history, there's a real popular movement demanding accountability, demanding an end to impunity in the country, demanding that those responsible, not just for the murder of Hariri, but the murder of thousands and thousands of innocents, of other politicians, but also of everyday bystanders, be held to account. Now, I don't think they will see in the judgment of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon an answer to their demands. But I think that drive for justice is essential. And in this very bleak period for Lebanon, for me, it's one of the last rays of hope that for the first time, there's a real movement demanding accountability, rejecting the compromises of the past, and saying we can do it. And I think this is really the moment, I think, for the Lebanese population to realize there is no shortcut to justice. They're going to have to build an independent judiciary. They are going to have the political will to hold those responsible accountable. And I hope that there will be a demand for Hezbollah to give any information they have on Ayyash, the convicted suspect.
But as the country moves forward to a point of having, one hopes clearly, free and fair elections, the thing about Lebanon surely is this. Politicians, they're here today, gone tomorrow, they come and go. But the system of, quote, corruption in Lebanon seems to represent primacy to everyone that literally buys into the political system or works their way into high political office. So people can't get elected into high political office without buying into the system that is endemic.
You are right. And I think that, and many people in Lebanon have come to the realization that this is a system that you cannot reform and that you actually need to change completely. Now, will they be able to? That is the big question today. And of course, this regime, because it is a regime in place, is not going to disappear from one day to the next. But you are right that it cannot be reformed, but it has to be changed. And one of the characteristics of this system is its impunity. And this is what made the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, in a way, an oddity. Because in Lebanon, unfortunately, no one is ever held accountable for political crimes, be they big or be they small. Just simply, there is no accountability. There's not a single political assassination where someone went to jail for it in Lebanon. And this is the system we need to change. Many people, and I have to say I was one of them, had hoped that back in 2006 that the Special Tribunal for Lebanon could break that cycle of impunity, could basically get the country into a different dynamic. That didn't happen, and it became very clear early on that the investigation was not going to unravel the system. And today, I have to say, I am quite disappointed because the verdict, regardless of however you want to read it, does not answer the fundamental questions, which is, who did it and why? And so the narrative, the Lebanese are going to remain divided by it. And there isn't really a sense of justice, at least for me today. And ultimately, it would really be for the victims and their families to decide that. And the fault isn't really with the tribunal as such, but it's really been a failure of the international investigation to really break the case and give the answers that many Lebanese wanted.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. Nadim Houri there in Paris. We really appreciate getting your thoughts on this still developing story. Thank you.
Thank you.